Design thinking is a way to solve problems, and it can be used by anyone. All great innovators in literature, art, music, science, engineering, and business have each practiced it. Design thinking is an iterative process in which we seek to understand the user, challenge our assumptions, and redefine problems in an attempt to identify alternative strategies and solutions that might not be instantly apparent with our initial level of understanding. At the same time, design thinking provides a solution-based approach to solving problems. It is a way of thinking and working, as well as a collection of hands-on methods. So, why do we call it design thinking? Well, what's really special about design thinking is that designers' work processes can help us to systematically extract, teach, learn, and apply these human-centered techniques to solve problems in a creative and innovative way, whether that be in our designs, our businesses, our countries, or even in our lives. Some of the world's leading brands, such as Apple, Google, and Samsung, have rapidly adopted the design thinking approach. And design thinking is being taught at leading universities around the world, including Stanford, Harvard, and Tennessee Tech. Design thinking revolves around a deep interest in developing an understanding of the people for whom we're designing the product or service. It helps us to observe and develop empathy with the target user. So design thinking helps us in that process by allowing us to question the problem, question our assumptions, and question the implications. Design thinking is extremely useful in tackling problems that are ill-defined or unknown by reframing the problem in human-centric ways, creating many ideas in brainstorming sessions, and adopting a hands-on approach in prototyping and testing. Design thinking also involves ongoing experimentation such as sketching, prototype, testing, and trying out concepts and ideas. The first stage of the design thinking process is to gain an empathetic understanding of the problem you are trying to solve. To create meaningful innovations, you need to first know your target users and care about their lives. Empathy involves observing, engaging, and empathizing with people to understand their experiences and motivations, as well as immersing yourself in their physical environment so you can gain a deeper personal understanding of the issues involved. Empathy is crucial to design thinking because it allows design thinkers to set aside their own assumptions about the world in order to gain insight into users and their needs. The problems you are trying to solve are rarely your own. Instead, they are those of a particular group of people. And in order to design for them, you must gain empathy for who they are and what is important to them. Observing what people do and how they interact in their environment gives you clues about what they think and feel. It also helps you to learn about what they need. By watching people, you can capture physical manifestations of their experiences, for example, what they do and what they say. This will allow you to infer the intangible meaning of those experiences in order to uncover those insights. These insights give you direction to create innovative solutions. The best solutions come out of the best insights into human behavior. But learning to recognize those insights is harder than you might think. Why? Well, because our minds automatically filter out a lot of information without ever even realizing it. We need to learn to see things with a fresh set of eyes, and empathizing is what gives us those new eyes. Engaging with people directly reveals the way they think and the values they hold. Sometimes these thoughts and values are not obvious to people who hold them, and a good conversation can surprise both the designer and the subject by the unanticipated insights that are revealed. The stories that people tell and the things that people say they do, even if they are different from what they actually do, are strong indicators of their deeply held beliefs about the way the world is. Good designers are built on a solid understanding of these beliefs and values. So, how do you empathize? First, you're going to observe. You want to view users and their behavior in the context of their lives. As much as possible, do observations in relevant contexts in addition to interviews. Some of the most powerful realizations come from noticing a disconnect between what someone says and what they actually do. Others come from a workaround someone has created, which may be very surprising to you as the designer, but she may not even think to mention in a conversation. Next, you're going to engage. Sometimes we call this technique interviewing, but it should really feel more like a conversation. Prepare some of the questions you'd like to ask, but expect to let the conversation deviate from them. Keep the conversation only loosely bounded. Elicit stories from the people you'd like to talk to, and always ask why to uncover deeper meaning. Engagement can come through both short intercept encounters and longer scheduled conversations. Then you really want to watch and listen. Certainly you can and should combine observation and engagement. Ask someone to show you how they complete a task. Have them physically go through the steps and talk you through why they are doing what they do. Ask them to vocalize what's going through their mind as they perform a task or interact with an object. Have a conversation in the context of someone's home or workplace. So many stories are embodied in artifacts. Use their environment to prompt deeper questions. Once all of this is done, when you move from empathy work to drawing conclusions from that work, you need to process all the things you heard and saw in order to understand the big picture and grasp the takeaways of it all. Unpacking is a chance to start that process. Sharing what you found with fellow designers or EagleWorks teammates, and capturing the important parts in a visual form. Get all of the information out of your head and onto paper where you can start to make connections. This is the beginning of the synthesis process, which leads into a define mode. During the define stage, you put together the information you have created and gathered during the empathize stage. Framing the right problem is the only way to create the right solution. So, this is where you will analyze your observations and synthesize them in order to define the core problems that you and your team have identified up to this point. You should seek to define the problem as a problem statement in a human-centered manner. The define mode of the design process is all about bringing clarity and focus to the design space. It is your chance and responsibility as a design thinker to define the challenge you are taking on, based on what you have learned about your user and about their context. After becoming an instant expert on the subject and gaining invaluable empathy for the person you are designing for, this stage is all about making sense of the widespread information you have gathered. The goal of the define mode is to craft a meaningful and actionable problem statement. This is what we call a point of view. This should be a guiding statement that focuses on insights and the needs of a particular end user. A good point of view is one that provides focus and frames the problem, inspires you and your team, informs criteria for evaluating competing ideas, empowers your team to make decisions independently and in parallel. It captures the hearts and minds of people you meet. And finally, it saves you from the impossible task of developing concepts that are all things to all people. In other words, your problem statement should be discrete, not broad. In the define mode, you determine the specific meaningful challenge to take on, and in the ideate mode, you focus on generating solutions to address that challenge. A well-scoped and well-articulated point of view will lead you to ideation in a very natural way. In fact, it is a great litmus test of your point of view to see if brainstorming topics fall out of your point of view. A great transition step is to create a list of the how might we brainstorming topics that flow from your problem statement. These brainstorming topics typically are subsets of the entire problem, focusing on different aspects of the challenge. Then, when you move into the ideation mode, you can select different topics and try out a few to find the sweet spot of where the group can really churn out a large quantity of compelling ideas. During the third stage of the design thinking process, designers are ready to start generating ideas. You've grown to understand your users and their needs in the empathize stage, and you've analyzed and synthesized your observations in the define stage. And now you've ended up with a human-centered problem statement. With this solid background, you and your team members can start to think outside of the box to identify new solutions to the problem statement you've created, and you can start to look for alternative ways of viewing the problem. You ideate in order to transition from identifying problems to creating solutions for your users. Ideation is your chance to combine the understanding you have of the problem space and the people you are designing for with your imagination to generate solution concepts. Particularly early in a design project, ideation is all about pushing for the widest possible range of ideas from which you can select, not just simply finding a single best solution. The determination of the best solution will be discovered later through user testing and feedback. Various forms of ideation are leveraged to step beyond obvious solutions and thus increase the innovation potential of your solution set. Harness the collective perspectives and strengths of your teams. Uncover unexpected areas of exploration. Create fluency, in other words, volume, and flexibility, variety in your innovation options. And get obvious solutions out of your heads and drive your team beyond them. You ideate by combining your conscious and unconscious mind and rational thoughts with imagination. For example, in a brainstorm, you leverage the synergy of the group to reach new ideas by building on other ideas. Adding constraints, surrounding yourself with inspiring related materials, and embracing misunderstanding all allow you to reach further than you could by simply thinking about a problem on your own. Another ideation technique is building. That is, prototyping itself can be an ideation technique. In physically making something, you come to points where decisions need to be made. This encourages new ideas to come forward. The prototype mode is the iterative generation of prototypes intended to answer questions that get you closer to your final solution. In the early stages of a project, that question may be broad. In these early stages, you should create low-resolution prototypes that are quick and cheap to make, but can elicit useful feedback from users and colleagues. In later stages, both your prototype and question may get a little bit more refined. A prototype can be anything that a user can interact with, be it a wall of Post-it notes, a gadget you put together, a role-playing activity, or even a storyboard. Ideally, you bias towards something a user can experience. Walking someone through a scenario with a storyboard is good, but having them role play through the physical environment that you've created will likely bring out more emotions and responses from that person. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth 1,000 pictures. The prototype and test modes should be practiced in tandem. What you are trying to test and how you're going to test that aspect are critically important to consider before you create a prototype. Examining these two modes in conjunction brings up the layers of testing a prototype. Though prototyping and testing are sometimes entirely intertwined, it is often the case that planning and executing a successful testing scenario is a considerable additional step after creating a prototype. Don't assume you can simply put a prototype in front of a user to test it. Often, the most informative results will be a product of careful thinking about how to test in a way that will let users give you the most natural and honest feedback. The test mode is when you solicit feedback about the prototypes you've created from your users and have another opportunity to gain empathy for the people you are designing for. Testing is another opportunity to understand your user, but unlike your initial empathy mode, you have now likely done more framing of the problem and created prototypes to test. Both these things tend to focus the interaction with users, but don't reduce your testing work to asking whether or not people like your solution. Instead, continue to ask why, and focus what you can learn about the person and the problem as well as your potential solutions. Ideally, you can test within a real context of the user's life. For a physical object, ask people to take it with them and use it within their normal routines. For an experience, try to create a scenario in a location that would capture the real situation. If testing a prototype in a situation is not possible, frame a more realistic situation by having users take on a role or task when approaching your prototype. A rule of thumb: always prototype as if you know you're right, but test as if you know you're wrong. Testing is the chance to refine your solutions and make them better. So why do we want to test? Mainly to refine prototypes and solutions. Testing informs the next iteration of prototypes. Sometimes this means going back to the drawing board. To learn more about your user, testing is another opportunity to build empathy through observation and engagement. It often yields unexpected insights. To refine your point of view, sometimes testing reveals that not only did you not get the solution right, but also that you failed to frame the problem correctly. So how do we test? First of all, show, don't tell. Put your prototype in the user's hands, or your user within an experience. And don't explain everything just yet. Let your tester interpret the prototype. Watch how they use and misuse what you have given them and how they handle and interact with it. Then listen to what they say about it and the questions they have. Create experiences. Create your prototypes and then test them in a way that feels like an experience that your user is reacting to, rather than an explanation that your user is evaluating. Generally, as you take multiple cycles through the design process, your scope narrows and you move from working on the broad concept to the nuanced details. For simplicity, the process is articulated here as a linear progression, but design challenges can be taken on by using the design modes in various orders. Furthermore, there are an unlimited number of design frameworks with which to work. The process presented here is one suggestion of a framework. Ultimately, you will need to make the process your own and adapt it to your own style and your own work. Hone your own process that works for you. Most importantly, as you continue to practice innovation, you take on a designerly mindset that permeates the way you work, regardless of the process you use. Thank you for your interest in learning more about design thinking. This presentation was adapted from materials provided under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. I encourage you to visit dschool.stanford.edu for much more information about design thinking. And, as always, if you have any questions, contact us at tntech.edu/EagleWorks.